This video is to show how different depictions on different cards that are technically the same card from deck to deck can lead to different flavors or different ways of sending across a message, or maybe even sometimes different messages. In this example, we're actually using a card from the Lenormand deck, but it would be just as true in a tarot deck or a Kipper deck. So this card that I have spread out here, these are all different depictions of a card known as the Garden in different Lenormand decks. And you can see each of them has the number 20 on them, and they're all just at least a little different. That first one in the bottom left corner does have this monument in the middle. This is the Enchanted Lenormand, or Enchanted, I think it's Enchanted Lenormand or Fairy Lenormand is what I want to say the name of this deck is. And you can see the little fairies around the monument, but there's also the whole nature aspect of this card as well. So the garden is generally, the roots of it go back to in the 1800s, I think, or maybe even before then. A lot of times where people buried their dead, they would also go and have like family reunions or family get-togethers. And so what we think of now as the cemetery would also have been considered the garden. So that's kind of the idea in general for the garden card. So it talks about things happening in public get-togethers, public gatherings, more things that we would think of as, like in the United States, we would think of it as a park more than a garden. But that's still the name of the card. So if you want to think really kind of park vibes, that's what you should think when you look at garden. Now, this other card on the bottom comes from my Gilded Lenormand. And this one, also we have a little monument. We have little flowers that are in the really fancy greenhouse, and you can walk up and tour them with the stairs, and there's a fountain, little water feature, lots of nature there. So we have, the vibes of this is a public place to get together and to see some interesting stuff that maybe you wouldn't see in your own private yard. And then we also have the top left. We have a little, like a water feature at the garden. And this is more of a throwback to like people celebrating at the same place where they buried their dead, with what looks like a mausoleum to me behind the water feature. And so this would be more of a throwback to the original version of garden, but you can see there's a feature there. Not exactly a monument, but a water feature. And, you could see that this is a place where you would have, people around there, and you could have celebrations or get-togethers there if you wanted to. A lot of times the garden card is considered like public announcements, social networks, things like that. So moving on to this last garden card that shows up in the upper right-hand corner, that's the Celtic Lenormand garden card. And this is a newer Lenormand deck for me. I'm just kind of getting to know it. And what shows up here is really interesting to me. This is where we see our big difference from this deck to the other decks as far as for the garden. We do have food out here as if somebody was having a picnic. So we've got kind of the park vibes here that the garden card would traditionally have. As somebody who is a farm girl and also who has lived in the mountains, I see that cauldron in the back, which is supposed to have, something good that's steaming there, maybe some hot soup, or, this is fall, so maybe this is some cider for some people to, to drink as a part of the celebration. But there's this huge problem for me as I look at this card, is we have this fire right next to a bunch of wheat, which is ripe and very flammable. And so the wheat, for me, talks about prosperity and abundance, especially with having a farming background. That talks about, having plenty. Also, everything in the front talks about abundance with all the food and the decanters with the drinks. All of this looks like plenty. And then with this cauldron here, with the fire right next to the wheat, it looks like we are on the verge of a crisis. We've got plenty, we've got more than enough, but we're on the verge of burning it all down. And so this card, this garden card, would mean something really different for me if I was pulling Lenormand cards for somebody in a reading, or even for myself. This would imply the idea that we're in a really good place, but we're sort of on the edge where things can go 50-50. If somebody's not keeping an eye on the flames underneath that cauldron, we could have a real problem real fast. And with that wheat there, that wheat's going to burn fast. So that could get out of hand, just super quick with just a little bit of wind. But also, if somebody is realizing, oh, we have danger here, we can take care of this, we can put that fire out, then maybe we preserve our abundance. So there is the vibe of celebration, but it's also the vibe of things are really edgy. And maybe this is like the typical Thanksgiving celebration where you have relatives that you don't normally see that much, you don't have that much in common with, and they bring up, a really touchy subject at the Thanksgiving meal, and next thing you know, you're having this great, wonderful Thanksgiving with plenty on the table, and now the whole thing's just torched. Nobody even wants to be there. Nobody has an appetite anymore because somebody has said something and gotten a whole big thing stirred up just at the drop of, a breath or two. So this garden card has a completely different meaning to me than the other garden cards whenever it comes to social gatherings or social networks, or even reputation with a group or reputation in society. This kind of really depicts the idea that those kind of social groups and everything going well with them can really be fragile. It's not guaranteed that everything goes well just because you get a group of happy people together. So it's a really interesting card, and it brings a whole new meaning in for anybody who would get this card in a reading that is not completely different than the others, but definitely much edgier than the other garden cards. So I just wanted to throw that out there because whenever I have classes, I teach you guys that, each deck has its own flavor, has its own way of delivering messages, sometimes has its own messages that are not like all your other decks. This is just one example of that. So I just wanted you guys to see that and how much of a contrast there can be sometimes.